I have skinned and cut up a whole chicken and cooked it on the grill for about an hour. And I will debone this. I'll use the meat for myself for now, and the bones I will save for the stock and put it in the freezer. These are the bones and the cartilage and such from a whole chicken that I just deboned. And I'm going to add that into my freezer bag. And this is going to go into the freezer. And I'm just going to add to this little by little, day by day, vegetables, bones, herbs, maybe a little broth, whatever I feel like. That goes in the freezer. Today I'm going to show you how I make my grilled bone broth. So first I've got my grill set up here, I've got the gas turned on, I've got the flame going on high, and I'm just going to go ahead and put my kettle, and I like to use a really deep kettle. It's about 1/4 full of water, and I'm going to heat this water up first to get it starting to get nice and warm. And then I'm just going to take all of my bags I've been collecting here that have been in the freezer. They're full of bones, chicken necks, vegetables. I'll show you what I've got going in here. A lot of chicken bones. I've got cabbage. I've got just handfuls of butternut squash. All these have nice color. I've got the skin, I've got the seeds, even the butternut squash seeds. Usually I can get about maybe 4 to 6, sometimes 7 bags. These are just gallon bags here. And you can see I've got beetroots, I've got some ribs, I've got onions and onion skins, I've got broccoli, I've got some fennel heads, red onions, I've got beet greens, lots of onion skins, and then just tons and tons of bones, because I like ribs. So I buy my chickens whole, and then I take the skin off. I save the skin for the bone broth, and then I cook and season the chicken with the bones, and then when I save those bones, they're already a bit pre-seasoned. Some more beef ribs, some radicchio. I've got actually some broth from something that I made, a bunch of cauliflower stems, a little bit more butternut squash. So you can see there's a lot of vegetables, root vegetables, green vegetables, skin and bones, and there's a lot of seasoning already going in this, so I'm not going to really need to season it that much. And then I also buy sometimes these pre-cooked chicken or pre-cooked chicken legs or something like that, and so I save all that. Again, it's all pre-seasoned, some really pretty beet stems, some red cabbage bases, a lot more onion skins. Like, you can save garlic skins and onion skins, don't be afraid to keep all those. There's a bunch of just chicken skin and all that's going in here. So I'm about 3/4 of the way to the top of this pot, and next I'm going to top this off with some water. So don't panic, I use the garden hose. So this is this is filtered water, right? All my garden plants get filtered water, so they don't get chlorine. So I'm going to just top this right off the top, just like that. Now this is sitting on high, and I'm going to let this run for a couple of hours. I'm going to go ahead and put the top on, and I'll see you back in a little bit. Okay, so it's been about another hour and a half. Let's take a look. Ooh, look at that. So we got the boil going here. You can see that the vegetables are starting to lose a little bit of their color, and you can also see that the broth is getting this beautiful bone brothy, kind of a brown color, ruby color. So I'm going to leave this, and I'm going to come back in about another half hour, leave it on high, and we'll check it then. All right, so what I see here is that the vegetables are starting to lose their color, right? You can see, and so let's find a bone. And then we want to look at the bones. And if the bones are starting to not look so pink, right? So I still see a little bit of pink there. But when they start to look really gray, that's when you know you're starting to kind of zero in on your timing. Another test I have is, let's see if we can find a little piece of something. Like I might bite a little piece of this butternut squash, or I might find, here we go, a little piece of carrot. And I might bite that and kind of taste test it. And if it's starting to not taste like a carrot, starting to taste super bland, that means that the flavor has gone from the carrot into our broth, right? And this is already smelling just unbelievably good. All right, so I'm gonna leave this on low, maybe for another half hour, and I'm gonna check it out again pretty soon. Okay, next check-in. So we're on low, and you'll see we have a little bit of a little edge bubble, a little boil going on, even on low. And then if we look, oh yeah, look at the bones. So the bones are starting to turn that gray color we were talking about. That means all the collagen is starting to come out. Yeah, look at that. Collagen starting to come out of the bones. And then you'll notice that we have this really deep, deep, deep color in our broth. That means a lot of the pigments of the vegetables have made it out of the vegetables and into the broth. So that's really what we're looking for. So I'm gonna shut this off, and it's gonna continue to cook probably for another hour on off. Okay, we're done with the cooking part. I've let the pot cool off a little bit. The heat is off. I came out, I stirred it around. We gotta get this thing cooled down, right? You can see, even though it's turned off, there's a lot of steam. There's a lot of hot water here. So I've just made myself a little bath down here. Now, my kitchen in the Airstream is really tiny. This pot doesn't even fit in it. So what I'm gonna do is just make this water bath. I just put a brick in the bottom because I don't want the hot pot to sit on the plastic. It'll melt it. So what I'm gonna do is, I'm just gonna take this sucker, I'm gonna set it down in the bath, just like that, and it's not gonna float away. Now what's gonna happen is, I can stir this water around here, and the hot is gonna transfer over to here. So as soon as this water starts to get pretty warm, then I can just replace the water just using the garden hose here. That's one thing you can do. The next thing you can do is to stir inside the pot, right? So what you're doing is you're trying to get the heat out of the water to here, because we can't strain this if it's really hot. You're gonna burn your hands, okay? So we're gonna let this sit, we're gonna let this cool down, and it just takes a minute, right? But I promise you it's so worth it, all right? This is our stock. This is the pot that we cooked on the grill, okay? So I'm gonna take a colander, and I'm gonna put it in a big bowl, and I'm gonna put it in a sink, okay? Now we're gonna have to do this in parcels because, you know, I'm limited in space, okay? So I'm just gonna gently, now this is already cooled, right? So I can work with this. I'm gonna slowly pour into the colander, and I'm straining out the bones and the vegetables, okay? So I'm about at the max, so I'm gonna take a little break. I'm gonna take the colander. You can see that it's, you know, taking out some of the bits. Put that back in. I'm just gonna set that to the side. And I'm gonna take, so this is the strained broth, and I'm gonna add it in this other big pan. This pan is gonna go in the refrigerator overnight. Okay, so don't ever put hot broth in your refrigerator, okay? Especially if you live in an Airstream, because it can't handle it, all right? So this cooled broth is gonna be in the refrigerator overnight, and tomorrow we're gonna warm it up and we're gonna season it. It's gonna be perfect, okay? All right, so I'm gonna do this in parcels. So I'm gonna put the strainer back. I'm gonna add a little bit more of the liquid. Strain. And I want every juicy little morsel, so I'm not going to be stingy. I'm going to let it drip, 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 drip. All the rest, and we're going to let it just, you know, I'm going to kind of take it with my hands. I'm going to pull it out. So I'm going to fill my colander, And then I'm just gonna go ahead and run some hot water over these bits just to squeeze out any extra little tiny flavor that's possible, right? Now I know this seems like a really big, long process, but you have to remember the value of making your own bone broth. Number one is you're recycling food that you would have thrown away. And number two, you're controlling the sodium, right? A lot of these bone broths add salt, and a lot of salt, right? I haven't added any salt at all, and I'm not gonna add any salt. So I'm just gonna use the grocery bag. I'm gonna get rid of it, right? And there's nothing left to be done with this, nothing. It's all done, okay? You know, look at that. I found some flavor, right? That's the last little bit I'm gonna add in here. All right, and then I'm just gonna pop that in the fridge overnight, and then tomorrow we're going to rewarm it. We're gonna taste test it and see if it needs any sort of extra flavors. And the most important flavor to a good bone broth, of course, is that umami, right? And then we want to make sure it has a little acid, it's got a little bit of salt, and it's got a little bit of sweet. And usually if you've got a lot of vegetables like we did already in our bone broth when we boiled it outside, the vegetables should already be taking care of the sweet, all right? Your bone broth should actually be a lot like a jelly. It should be like a semi-solid. It shouldn't just be watery. We're going to be working on putting our bone broth in containers for use. And you have a variety of choices. So depending on the size of the batch that you make, you may want to just put it in containers and use it within 3 to 5 days from the refrigerator. Or you may want to store it for a longer period of time, and you have two choices. Number one, you can put it in, for example, quart bags and put it in the freezer, or you can do a modified version of canning with these canning jars, right? So this isn't traditional canning, right? This is, I'm gonna just call it temporary or modified canning. And this is gonna give you 1 to 6 weeks, maybe, right? So freezing is gonna give you about 6 months. So it depends on, again, how much you make and how you intend to use it, over a period of time. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at what I've done so far. So I've taken our bone broth out of the refrigerator that was in there overnight, and it has skimmed over with a refrigerated layer of fat, and we definitely want to remove that fat. That fat isn't going to contribute to the flavor whatsoever. So I'm just going to use my hand. I'm going to kind of swirl it around because I don't really care if I use my hands or not, right? I'm going to swirl that around and pick that up into a big blob. I'm going to just dispose of that. So some folks say that, keeping the fat or using the fat adds flavor, and I'm going to say in healthy living, I'm not really going to go for that, right? So we have ways of creating flavor that doesn't have to do with being, having an unhealthy lifestyle, okay? All right, so I'm just gonna check my temperature. I've got a quick little thermometer gauge here, and I'm looking for at least 140 degrees. And it looks like we've got what we're looking for, 145 degrees, okay? So that's perfect, right? So we need that temperature because we need to make sure it's hot enough to create our modified seal if we decide to do canning, right? Or the modified canning, which is, I'm going to show you a variety of things today, and that's definitely one of them, because I feel like it gives you a chance to create a bunch of different flavors, and it's also very giftable, right? To your friends who don't do bone broth, right? But they're like super impressed with your cooking skills, right? All right, so one of the things that we have to do, that we have to make a choice, is about how we're gonna season our bone broth, right? So I've got enough quantity here that I can make a variety of different flavors. So I'm going to do that today, right? So in fact, my neighbor just came over and I said, hey, I'm going to be making a variety of bone broths. I gave her 5 choices and she's like, oh, I'll take that sort of Asian inspired one, right? So I've got a bunch of ingredients and I'm just going to tell you, this is a great way to get rid of like when there's this much left in the bottom of the bottle, right? So what I've got today is a little bit of mole here, right? So I'm going to make a mole flavor. I've got a little bit of some pesto that I made, right? That's also left over. I'm going to use a little bit of curry powder along with some carrot juice. You can see I've got a little carrot juice. Doesn't that sound nice? We're going to do that. And then I'm going to do a Southwest version because I've got a little bit of Southwest salsa. And then I'm going to do an Asian inspired with a little bit of a sweet chili plus a little bit of rice vinegar. Notice how little bit of rice vinegar is left there, right? And a little bit of soy sauce. Now you can also choose to not flavor anything. So for example, I've got 12 canning jars here ready, okay? So I could, if I wanted, I could make all 12 the same flavor, or I could do what I call nude broth. I can just take this broth here that's ready to go and I can prepare it in all the jars and I could season it later. The one thing I'm not going to do is salt it, okay? I'm going to say there's enough salt in our broth to kind of carry us over, okay? So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to taste test the broth. So I'm just going to take a little dip. And I'm going to look for the notes that are already in the broth because every batch you make is going to be different. Now, although we use chicken bones and pork bones and a few beef bones, this is very poultry essenced, right? It's very buttery. Now remember, I removed all the fat. It's very buttery and it has a sort of green garden, sort of a celery kind of, it tastes a lot like a very rich chicken broth or chicken stock, okay? So today I bought this organic bone broth, chicken flavor, right? And the ingredients are organic chicken stock, so chicken stock, I don't know, is that bone broth? And organic chicken flavor. And I don't know what that is either. Okay, so that's this, right? 10 bucks. Probably 2 servings. And then let's just look at the difference. That's this. And I want you to notice the color. And then this is ours. And I want you to notice the color. I want you to notice that this is quite pale and this is quite rich looking, right? So now I know this isn't going to transfer that well over video, but let's take a taste test. This tastes very watery. It tastes like burnt chicken skin. It doesn't taste like chicken meat. It tastes like chicken skin. And then ours tastes very rich. It tastes complex. It tastes rich, deep, and buttery, right? I told you that already. It tastes very buttery. And I want you to notice that, what you're paying for, 10 bucks, maybe 2 servings, and then ours, which is essentially free, right? Just some, good-hearted time, cooking time. This is probably about 30 servings, what we're making today, okay? The first thing we need to do before we season is to get our chill bath or ice bath ready. So I've got my sink full of cold water and I'm gonna add a bunch of ice to start chilling it down. Now, why are we adding ice? Because the bone broth is already quite hot And the dynamic is that when we put the bone broth in the jar, it's got a little rubber seal, and when we plunge it in the ice bath, it causes the seal to kind of suck down onto the glass, and it allows for an airtight seal, which gives us that, you know, up to 6 weeks in the refrigerator of freshness preservation. So we are not making the kind of broth that you can, you know, stick in the cupboard for years on end or whatever, right? That's not this, okay? All right, so first thing I'm gonna do, because we're working with glass and because we have a wet environment, is I'm just gonna put down a towel, okay? So the first flavor that we're gonna make is going to be the mole, okay? So any mole would work, and if you don't wanna make mole, that's great too. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna scoop in until I'm about half full, okay? And then I'm just gonna grab my mole and I'm gonna take a generous tablespoon and I'm gonna swirl it around. Now you don't have to mix this. And for safety, I'm just gonna remind you that once you put the lid on, you can't shake hot liquids, okay? So, and you can see that I've got a color change already happening here with the mole flavor. I've got a little on the spoon, I'm gonna tuck it in. Now remember, after, you're going to reheat this, right, in a pot. So it doesn't matter if it's completely mixed. Sometimes, like, I'll do a mixture that's like white bean or leeks or something like that, right? And you get a lot of sediment on the bottom, and it doesn't matter because later when you open it up and you put it in the pot, you stir it around, or you might use like a magic wand or something to kind of pulverize it. Okay, so that's half full, and you can see it already has that beautiful mole color. And then I want to make sure that when I fill these, I don't go any higher than here, right? So where the rim is for sealing the lid, I need to leave that space. That's gonna create our vacuum, okay? So I'm gonna put that there, and I'm gonna grab the lid. And these are new lids, right? So I recycle the jar and I recycle these, but I don't recycle the lids. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna turn this lightly, and then I'm gonna push down on the top with my thumb. I'm gonna finish, I'm gonna really crank it, and then I'm gonna stick it in the ice water, just like that, okay? And it doesn't matter if it submerges or not. So I love the mole flavor, so I'm gonna make another one. Same thing. About half full. Now you need to make sure that your rim is clean. So you might want to have a little paper towel handy. Okay, and I've got just enough mole to make another one. Put that out of the way. So in case you haven't figured it out, I'm in love with cooking, and I would love to have my own cooking show. I don't think anybody would watch it because, like, this is my whole kitchen, right? It's like 4 square feet, making the most of it. So I'm gonna give it a little stir, and then I'm gonna add a little more. I just love cooking. And same thing, right to the edge. And just so that you can remember the features here, make sure that your rim is nice and clean. And I'm just gonna borrow this, and then I'm gonna put that on. I'm gonna start to turn it, and then I'm gonna push with my thumb and give it a nice crank. So those are my 2 moles, so let's just keep going. Okay, let's do, since we have it handy, let's do the pesto. So I'm going to add, now this is a pesto that I buy from a local store that makes it fresh. So, I mean, it's just gloriously green, right? And again, I'm going to put about a big, generous, oh geez, let's do two big, generous tablespoons. I'm going to twirl it around a little bit, and then I'm going to go ahead and top that off, as we talked about already. Now the pesto has quite a bit of olive oil in it, so later you're going to really see a line of that olive oil when it cools later. So I push the top down, give it a close. Yeah. All right, let's keep going. So I'll make duplicates later. I just want to show you the variation. So this is a really nice salsa that I love. It's a Southwest salsa. Now I've done sort of these Southern inspired, or south of the border inspired bone broths before, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll take the salsa and I'll puree it before I put it in. But today it doesn't matter. We're going to do a little bit more like cruda. So I'm going to put 2 tablespoons in there of the salsa. I'm going to give it a stir. And then I'm going to go ahead and top that off. And then again, I want to make sure that my rim is nice and clean. And then I'm going to, just like we did before, push down. Okay, so now we've got the salsa, and I'm going to do the Asian inspired for my neighbor, because she watches my dog all the time and she's so great. Little Brew. So Brew's sitting on the couch right behind the camera. Hi, Brew. Hi, little man. I'll introduce you to him someday. All right, Asian inspired. Or we should say Eastern inspired, right? So I'm gonna do a little bit of a soy sauce. Just a little bit. And then I'm going to do a little bit of rice vinegar. Remember, I'm just using stuff that I have in the house. Just a little bit. So you could almost put balsamic or rice vinegar or apple cider vinegar or raspberry vinegar in everything. That's going to give you that nice acid kick that you're looking for. And then I just happen to have this great Thai sweet chili, so I'm going to put that. And I guarantee you I'm going to make one of these for myself. Okay, and then we're going to fill that up. Same thing. If you haven't seen the movie Julie and Julia, I highly recommend it. I've seen it like 5 times. I just love cooking, and I like watching cooking shows. And I'm not going to do a high five to Gordon Ramsay, because he's a little too edgy for me. But if you watch any of his cooking shows from his home, he's very sweet, and he's very kind, and very representative of the what do I want to say, he's just a good-hearted guy. But I think when he gets to the show, I'm just letting some of the water out of the sink because I'm almost overflowing here. This water's really cold. I think the showmanship part that he does is a little over the edge, but he's a good-hearted guy, right? Okay, so the last one we're going to do is going to be our curry and carrot, which is also a great combination. Now, I want to make sure that I'm moving along, because I don't want my bone broth to get cold, okay? And I've left this out so that it's warm. And I'm gonna put a little carrot, and then I've got just some curry powder. And I'm not gonna be super generous with this because it can really gain up on you. Oh, and then I'm gonna fill this up. And what I want you to see is, look at this beautiful gold color. It's just stunning, right? Now, later, you can use these to braise chicken, or you can poach fish, or you can saute vegetables, right? I've even used bone broth to cook ribs, right? So I marinate the ribs and I kind of sear them off, but then I put them outside on the grill and I put a little bone broth and they just kind of melt apart. It's so great. Okay, so I'm gonna keep going to finish off all of my jars, and I will catch up with you in a moment. It's been about 20-25 minutes, and I need to check whether these containers are ready to go into the refrigerator. You do not want to put hot containers into your refrigerator. Now, especially because I live in an Airstream, my refrigerator can't handle it. So I've got a thermometer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to check the ambient water, which is about 52 degrees, so that's good. And then what I'm going to do is, and I always do this, the center one here is not sealed like the rest of them, right? So I'm planning to use this one very soon. And so I'm going to check the temperature there. And that's about 54 degrees. So that's looking pretty good. Now I'm willing to put that into the refrigerator. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark this with my Sharpie. And I'm going to put N-O-W. Now, like, I need to, this is first, okay? Set that aside. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry these all off. I'm going to mark them for their flavor with that same Sharpie, and I'm definitely going to put the date. So remember, we're looking at less than 6 weeks, right? So these are all quite giftable to my friends, and I want to introduce them to the value of bone broth, the flavors, whatever. And so I'm going to take care of that. Basically, we're done. And now you can see I've got a little setup over here. I've got some lime juice, some jalapenos, some carrots, some beets, and a beautiful half of a butternut squash that were left over. And I've got just a little bit of leftovers, and I'm going to make a sweet and sour braise with the vegetables. And then I've got some chicken that I cooked yesterday, and I'm going to put that on the top. And I'm going to just put some dry seasonings on that. And I'm going to enjoy that over rice. And namaste. Thank you for joining me and being so patient. It's a really long video, but I think that bone broth has a lot of value health-wise. And I hope you'll at least give it a chance on a small scale, even if you just do, 2 bags or whatever. There are lots of ways to do this. This is probably the most complicated, and I'll tell you why. I love a process. I love things that take steps that are, one thing after the other. That's who I am as a person. Honestly, every night when I make my dinner, I make an original dinner. It takes at least 2 hours. And you can't see it here because I flipped it out of the way. You might have noticed it before, but I've got my iPads here, and I always watch a Rom-Com while I'm cooking because it's inspiring, right? So again, thank you very much, and please join me again for another of some crazy episodes of whatever I'm going to do next. I promise you it's going to be healthy and it's going to taste good. Thank you so much. See you again soon.